Okay, welcome to this online version of the presentation Resilience, the Path to Hope and Meaning. As Jackie said, I'm Robin Matthies, and I am the Trauma and Resilience Program Manager in the Division of Public Health at the Department of Health Services. And actually, I've had the pleasure of presenting a good handful of times to DWD staff and have had really good outcomes from those presentations. So I'm happy to be back talking with you all and getting to do some interagency collaboration. So to get started, hold on here. The agenda for today, I'm going to talk about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and trauma, and kind of give an overview of what that is. And it may be a refresher for some of you if you've heard of ACEs before, but every time even I talk about it, I typically learn a little bit something new. And when people ask questions, I also learn new things. I'll share data, specifically ACE data from Wisconsin to you all, so you could just sort of see the scope of what's going on here in Wisconsin and what people are reporting. And then we'll talk about building resilience, which I think is more needed now than maybe it has been in a long time. And so this is actually wonderful timing. Jackie and I spoke about what good timing for this presentation it was, in fact. So we'll get into that, and I'll actually give you some tips and tools that you can use even immediately if you wanted to sort of build resilience in yourself and in people that you care about. Okay, so to start off, I'm going to show a movie. Not a movie, actually. It's just a clip, a video that gives a really good overview of ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, and after that we will move into some more about ACEs and how they impact us throughout our lives. So hopefully this works. Or hopefully it gets stuck. Okay, hold on one second here. Let me try again. I'm going to let it load for a moment, and maybe that will help the scenario. Actually, I am going to go out of this for 1 second. You're all going to see my computer screen. Sorry. I'm going to turn this off, as I think it will help speed up the internet a little bit. Okay. Let's try this again.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Amanda and Felitti tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems, and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation, and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
Okay, so that video does a really good job of kind of giving an overview of what ACEs are and how the study came about. I should have said this earlier on, but some of you may be like, what does this have to do with the work we're doing with DWD? And the quick answer is that when I'm going through this presentation, not only do I want to you to think about the people you're serving, the work that you're doing, and those you're working with, but also think of yourself and your colleagues. So kind of all encompassing with this presentation, how these things might impact any one of you or the people that you work with. And I think that that's a really important takeaway of this, and kind of speaks to what the video was saying, is that ACEs can impact anybody. And I'm going to show you data in a little while that really highlights that. But also a few important things to take away from that video and otherwise are that ACEs are also intergenerationally passed. So when parents have ACEs, their kids are more likely to have ACEs, and so on and so forth. And then I also wanted to just speak a little bit more about that ACE score and highlight that, yes, the more ACEs someone experiences, the more likely they are to also experience negative outcomes. But the most important takeaway is that ACEs are not destiny. So just because someone has a high ACE score does not mean that they will then go on to experience negative outcomes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and how we can prevent some of those negative outcomes from happening. So I also want to point out that the ACE study is just that. It's a study. So when you look at this graphic, you can see at the top, those are all the ACEs and things that were marked in the study to highlight what childhood trauma can do and how it can impact somebody. But it's not an exhaustive list. So if you look at the bottom of this graphic, you can see things like adverse community events or environments, things like poverty, discrimination, bullying, witnessing violence outside of the home or the fear of violence outside of the home. None of those are a part of the ACE study, but they all have similar impacts that that the ACEs and the ACE study do. So I guess the important thing to know and to take away here is when I show you the data for Wisconsin, you can assume that the numbers you're seeing are low because those are the numbers for these particular ACEs that are part of a study, not all of the different things that can impact people and cause adversity early in life. So hopefully that makes sense. So I want to talk about stress. And again, some of this may be a review for some of you, but it's an important way to tie all of this together. So when we're young, especially between the ages of 0 and 5, it's important for us and young people to experience stress. And so I'm going to talk about 3 different kinds of stress. The first one is positive stress. And it's really a normal part of a developing child's brain and what we want to see. We want young children to experience positive stress. So examples of that would be getting a vaccine, the first day of school, things that, you know, cause the adrenaline to flow a little bit more, the heart to beat a little bit faster, but also typically very easy to cope with. And it's what we would consider an adaptive behavior because it'll help those children to be able to cope with stress moving forward in life. And then there's things like tolerable stress, or stress like tolerable stress, I should say, which is typically more severe, but also usually acute and limited in duration. So that might be a more serious medical event like a broken bone where maybe even there's a trip in an ambulance or a hospital visit, a loss of a loved one like maybe a grandparent or a family member that doesn't just impact the child but also the other folks in the household, and so seeing others stress. And again, typically tolerable stress is also adaptive and helps young people to be able to cope with stressors later in life. That being said, this one is a little bit more intense, as I said, and without the support of a family member or a loved one, it's going to be more difficult for children to process that stress. And so it's really key and important that they have a support system in place to be able to best cope with that stress. And then finally, toxic stress. And toxic stress is really what we're talking about when we're talking about ACEs and other forms of trauma that cause what we'll call toxic stress throughout this presentation. And it's really strong, frequent, and prolonged. Things like physical and emotional abuse, bullying, discrimination, different things that happen often or over and or are so significant that it's incredibly difficult, if not even impossible, to cope with. And this would be considered maladaptive. We do not want children to experience this kind of stress at such a young age because it does not help them at all to be able to cope with stress moving forward. And in fact, it changes and sort of rewires their brain, which I'm going to talk about now. So here is 2 different brains of children. The brain on the left is that of a healthy child or a child who has not experienced significant adversity. And the brain on the right is a brain of a child who's experienced significant neglect. And you can see that these brains look incredibly different. So a couple of things here. Between the ages of 0 and 5, a child's brain excuse me, is the most malleable or plastic, meaning it's changing rapidly. And it goes through what's called the pruning process. And some of you may have heard of that before. It's very psychology 101 kind of curriculum stuff. But basically what it means is that between the ages of 0 and 5, a child is getting so much information that their brain can't handle it all. So what it does is it prunes out what it considers unnecessary information. And so hold on to that thought and idea for a minute. So what you see here are areas of the brain that are red, and what we want to see are red areas in the brain. That means that those are places that are active in the brain, and you can see that the brain on the left has a lot of activity in a lot of different places, whereas the brain on the right, most of the activity you see is down there below, and that's where the amygdala is, and that is where our brains receive our stress response. So when our bodies produce cortisol hormone, that's where it's received. That's where the fear response is received in our brains. So what's happening there is that so much energy is going to that one particular place in that child's brain, and it's then pruning out things that are essential for healthy development and the ability to thrive moving forward. Things like impulse control and executive functioning, rational thinking, things that are so crucial to help a young person develop into a thriving adult are missing here because the brain has paid so much attention in that one spot, dealing with the extraordinary stress that that young person is facing. And the good news here is that the brain can be rewired. And we'll never see the brain on the right match that of the brain on the left, but there's a lot of research going on right now, and even in Wisconsin, at the Center for Healthy Minds, which is in Madison, Richard Davidson, who's a scientist, he's doing a lot of stuff with brain rewiring and through mindfulness. And what they're finding is when there's different mindfulness techniques being given to folks who have experienced significant trauma, the brain actually does rewire, which makes it a lot more likely that that person will then go on to thrive. And again, none of this is destiny, and I want to be very clear about that, but it is important to note that things can happen in a young person's brain that will impact them throughout their life and shift and change different behaviors that they may be displaying or experiencing. And so this is mostly there to show you that it's really not their fault. Whatever their experiences were led to a lot of the behaviors that came after. So I want to get into Wisconsin-specific data now, and this is from the Wisconsin Behavioral Risk Factor Survey, and that is a survey that's given out every year from the Department of Health Services, and it's asking adults over the age of 18 about experiences that they had before they were 18. So you can see here that 59% of Wisconsin residents have at least one ACE. And while ACEs do happen to all people, they do impact certain populations differently than others. So you can see individuals who are American Indian or Alaskan Native, multiracial or Black are much more likely to have an ACE than their Hispanic, Latino, white, or Asian counterparts. And there could be many reasons why we're seeing this, but one that I think is really important to pull out is that, remember when I showed you that graphic earlier of the ACEs that are part of the ACE study, but then also adverse community environments and things like discrimination, racism, those all impact people and cause significant stress, historical trauma also. So it's something that is also intergenerationally passed, causes that same sort of toxic stress, and lends way to sort of compiling with any other stressors and impacts a young person's brain. So those are things to think about when we see these differentials in, populations who have more ACEs versus populations who have less. ACEs are also connected to household income. So you can see individuals who are currently making less than $25,000 a year are much more likely to have 4 or more ACEs than individuals who are making $50,000 a year or more. And again, when we think of people who are very low income or in poverty, that in itself is also extraordinarily stressful. Not having access to even basic needs is something that could cause an extraordinary amount of stress on an individual or family. And again, back to that intergenerational passing, we know poverty is also intergenerationally passed. So if you could start to see the connection there between ACEs and discrimination in race and household income or poverty, and start to link that, you can see how these things are quite interconnected. So we know that ACEs also impact mental health, and you can see here this graph measures current anxiety, lifetime depression diagnosis, and frequent mental distress. And you can see that individuals with 0 ACEs are much less likely to experience any of those mental health concerns versus those with 4 or more ACEs. And obviously you could see that there's sort of an upward climb based on ACE score here. Same thing goes with physical health. You can see that individuals, or this measures asthma, fair to poor general health, and obesity. And again, individuals with 0 ACEs are much less likely to experience those than individuals with 4 or more ACEs. So here's a breakdown of specific ACEs. And you can see that 30% of Wisconsin residents reported being emotionally abused in their household as kids, 17% reported physical abuse, and 12% reported sexual abuse. And these graphs can be a little visually deceiving. So oftentimes when I'm talking to a group of people about sexual abuse, that sexual abuse statistic, you can kind of revisualize it as more than 1 in 10 Wisconsin residents experience sexual abuse as children, and that's an alarming rate. So more breakdown of ACEs. 28% of Wisconsin residents grew up with someone who was using or used harmful substance or had, wow, let me fall all over my words, who experienced substance abuse in the household. 24% grew up in a household that experienced divorce or parental separation. 16% witnessed violence between adults in the household. 19% grew up with someone who struggled with mental illness, and 8% grew up with someone that was incarcerated in their household. And I think I want to bring your attention to that 8%, because that is the group that is the most likely to have 4 or more ACEs. And I bring that up because back again to that idea of intergenerational passing, we know that individuals who grew up with someone who is incarcerated are more likely themselves to go through the juvenile justice system and then also be incarcerated as adults. So just to think about how that is also passed along. So I want to pull out substance abuse again for a second, just to show you this visual to kind of explain that cycle of adversity. So if you look over there on the right, someone has an adverse childhood experience that causes them toxic stress, which could lead to harmful use of drugs and alcohol as a coping mechanism. If they have kids, that substance abuse in the home becomes an adverse childhood experience for their kids. And so you can see how this can sort of go in circles. And also we know that when young people see a behavior from their parents or other individuals in their household, they're more likely to emulate that behavior. So that also highlights how this can become more cyclic as well. So finally, I wanted to highlight ACE scores in current smoking. So you can see here that 16% of the general population in Wisconsin smokes, and individuals with 0 ACEs are smoking at 10%, so less than that of the general population. Individuals with 4 or more ACEs are smoking at 32%, twice that of the general population. And when I first saw this, I used to work in tobacco prevention, and I'm also a former smoker. So this caught my attention, and I wanted to learn a bit more. So I dug a little deeper and found that 74% of all people who smoke in Wisconsin have at least one ACE. And that kind of took me aback for a moment, and I thought more about it. And so I want to back up for a moment to the ACE study again. So the two researchers that conducted the study, one of them originally had been working with women who were overweight and wanted to lose weight. And he gave them all these tips and tools of how to lose that weight. And all of the women in his group lost weight. And they went on their way, and he did a check-in with them a few months later, and many of the women had gained the weight back. And he kind of said, well, what happened here? I gave you all these tips and tools, you had lost the weight. And it turned out that most of the women who had gained the weight back had experienced significant trauma as children. And it turned out that that was part of their coping mechanism. And at that moment, he realized that you can give someone all the tips and tools that exist, but if you're not unpacking why the behavior started in the first place, it's going to be very difficult to stop that behavior, because that's been a coping mechanism for an individual for a really long time. So back to smoking for a moment. In Wisconsin, or anywhere for that matter, if someone wants to quit smoking, typically they're given a number to call, a quit line. And when they call the quit line, they talk to a counselor who gives them all these tips and tools on how to quit smoking. And while they're valuable tips and tools, again, those counselors are not trained professionals in sort of unpacking why they started smoking in the first place. Why did it become a coping mechanism for them? So because of that, we're seeing a greater percentage of people who have ACEs still smoking. And this goes across the board. It's not just with smoking, it's with anything that's an addictive behavior. If that's a coping mechanism and someone is trying to quit, if they don't get to the root of why they started in the first place, it's going to be really difficult, as that's sort of been their armor from whatever traumatic experiences they experienced in the past. So that was, I'm going to stop here, a very long list of data. So this is where I'm going to pause and see if folks have questions thus far based on the data or anything that we've talked about that has to do with ACEs. Yeah, so Jackie, if there is any questions that have been typed in and you want to let me know.
Yeah, so we had one question. She was curious to know, as someone who works closely with high school counselors, if there's any hard data that correlates high ACE scores with school shootings.
That is a very good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I'd be wary a little bit of trying to find that, because it could be stigmatizing, if we see that higher ACE scores happen to correlate with school shootings. Though, I guess on the other end, it could also be informative. I will say this, on the flip side of that, there is research that's come out that highlights how much stress is being caused to young people because of the school shooting drills that they're having. So while they're incredibly unlikely to actually experience a school shooting, I don't remember the statistic, but it was something like 95% of kids in public schools are going through these drills, and it's causing extraordinary stress. And they're even calling it similar to that of ACEs to the young kids. So then it doesn't actually answer your question, but it is a sort of a flip side to what you were bringing up.
Thanks, Robin. We have another question here.
Okay.
Couple more. Is there any data that speaks to ACE amongst incarcerated adults and recidivism?
There is quite a bit of data on incarcerated adults. I don't know specific to that of recidivism, but I mean, and this is just non-researcher hypothesis. But again, as I had mentioned earlier, if they're not getting to the root of why the behavior is happening, so there's a variety of reasons that people might be incarcerated. When they come out, it might be more difficult, like if it's drug related, to curb that, because they don't typically get extensive counseling for the reasons that started in the first place. So reintegrating into society could prove to be difficult. That said, that was just a hypothesis. I don't actually know about recidivism rates and ACEs, but I do also know, and I'll send you this, Jackie, and you can send it out to the group. I just saw the most amazing video of inmates in California, I think it was, talking about their ACEs and learning more about them. And the percentage of people who are incarcerated who have ACEs is extraordinarily high.
That would be awesome. Thanks, Robin.
Yeah.
We just had one other request. Can you go back to the prior slide just for a few moments? We had Seth, I just wanted to take a look at the data.
With the smoking one?
It looks to be so. And that's all we have for questions.
Go ahead.
So that's all we have for questions so far. So
okay,
whenever you're ready to keep going.
Okay, we are about to turn to a more positive conversation now. I mean, I know that ACEs and talking about them can feel kind of doom and gloom, and that's not the purpose of this. The purpose is to sort of highlight what people are experiencing and how it can impact us moving through our lives. But there is, like I said, so much that can be done. And in the video, they quote one of the researchers and saying what's predictable is preventable. Yeah, preventable. And I really like that quote because I think it's so true. We know that these are intergenerationally passed. We know that there's ways to prevent individuals from experiencing the aftermath or the outcomes of a high ACE score. And so it's really about all of us connected in putting in efforts to help to prevent them from sort of taking charge and being passed along from generation to generation. So with that, I'm going to show another video. Some of you may have seen this video before. It's really a great video. I won't say much more about it, but I'll talk about it after I show it. I do want to say that it can be a little bit sad for some people. So I apologize if there's unwanted tears, but it's such a good video, and the message in it is really amazing. So here we go. Okay, so like I said, it could be a little bit sad for some people. Typically, when I'm giving this presentation in person, I ask people what emotions came to the surface and sort of what the takeaways were that they saw in this video. And since that's kind of difficult to do right now, I'll share some of what I typically hear. A lot of people talk about how it made them sad, or how it made them feel compassion or empathy. And part of what that's about is that, you know, we're seeing things happen throughout this video that either we've experienced ourselves or we know someone who has experienced. So that in itself kind of, you know, grabs at the heartstrings a little bit and is a reminder to us that, you know, our own experience or someone that we care about's experience was difficult or wonderful. Also, you know, people often point out the thought bubble or whatever you would call that, the thing that shows whatever that person's experiencing that others can't see. And we all have those. People only see what we allow them to see, or maybe what has been written about them in some sort of report. But typically our stories are mainly our own or shared with people that we're incredibly close to. And I say that because it's so important to realize that we don't know any person's entire story. Even if we know a lot about them, we still don't know their entire story. But typically, if you're thinking about the people that your clients or the people that are your colleagues, you don't know what they're experiencing on any given day. And so sometimes we can get upset or frustrated at somebody because they act or respond to something in a way that feels unsettling to us. And oftentimes that has very little to nothing to do with us. So I often use this example. I'll ask everyone in the room if they have ever been snapped at by somebody at work, raise their hand. And, you know, everyone kind of laughs and raises their hands. It's rare to not see a hand come up when I ask that question. And then I ask them, you know, what do you experience when someone snaps at you? And, you know, they say that it makes their heart beat faster. It gives them a little bit of a burst of adrenaline, you know, and their body responds as such. So it might make them feel hot. It might make them feel instantly frustrated, the heart pounding, a little burst of anxiety. And oftentimes people don't say anything. I mean, the reaction is either to not say anything or to say, why did you just snap at me? But typically we don't say that and we walk away. But it still sits with us and resonates with us. And we're much more likely to move forward then and actually snap at somebody else. And then that person, again, same thing, they're more likely to go and snap at somebody else. And that person maybe is more likely to go home and snap at their partner or their children. So you can kind of see how that can cycle through, how it has a ripple effect. And I bring that up because imagine if you were able to take a step back if someone snapped at you and said, you know what, this probably has nothing to do with me. They probably have a story of their own of something that has happened to them today, last week, that is causing them to be extra agitated today. And we'd live in a very different world if we were all able to do that. And to be clear, I've given this presentation numerous times in multiple iterations, and I still, if someone snaps at me, am not able to take that collective step back and say, oh, okay, it probably has nothing to do with me. But I am able to think about it a little bit more and maybe bounce back from it a little bit more quickly. And so I encourage you to think about that and to think about different ways that you too can sort of take a step back from judgment or having it be about you. And that was one example. There's plenty of other examples, and that could be behaviors that your clients are experiencing or have experienced, you know, maybe struggling with addiction or struggling with maintaining a job, things like that. It's easy for us to cast judgment on others that are behaving in ways that we don't. And I don't say that in a pointed way. We're all we are all like implicit in that, and we all have biases. And so because of that, we are predispositioned to judge. And the importance here is that without a complete story, it actually isn't fair at all for us to be judging that person and whatever they're experiencing / their behaviors are. And if you go back to what I talked about earlier with that brain diagram and the difference between those brains and how that young person's brain was implicated in the adversity they were experiencing, it kind of brings us full circle. So I hope that makes sense, and that the connections are there. I don't see anyone's faces when I'm in a room. If I see everyone looking flat, I'm like, let me try something else. But I'm just going to assume everyone's nodding their heads in total agreement and understanding. So what this idea is this idea of being trauma-informed. It came from the ACE study, and it's a response to ACEs, and it really is a buzzword. When I think of trauma-informed, I think of compassion, empathy, kindness, things that we should be displaying anyways, but for the sake of the ACE study, the response was trauma-informed care. And it really is a paradigm shift, moving from what's wrong with you. So what's wrong with you that you're behaving in that way, which is a judgment ask, to what happened to you. So what happened in your life that caused this to be a coping mechanism? It's a very different approach to a similar question, but they feel different and they land differently. And then even more importantly than that, focusing on what's right with you. So if you're working with a client who is struggling and who has, something going on that would be considered negative, and it's important to remember that they're a whole person, and to not just remember that yourself, but to remind them too. What's something that's going well today? What's something that you feel proud of this week? And being creative in finding that information, because not only does it help to sort of give way to a strength-based approach towards working with somebody, but also it's a good, gentle reminder to them. And I'm not saying that it doesn't mean that you don't focus on the reason they're there and whatever it is they're experiencing, but just sprinkling in a little bit of, and what's going well, can make a world of difference to somebody who's struggling. So now I'm going to talk about resilience. And even though I wasn't going to pause here, I'll pause here quickly to see if anyone has questions about or comments about the video and or about trauma-informed care. I kind of go through that pretty quickly because, again, I think it's important as it's attached to the ACE study, but I think that building resilience is in its own right a form of trauma-informed care, and it's one I like to focus on. But Jackie, are there any questions at this point?
I don't have any at this very moment.
Okay, I will proceed on, and if people did have questions, then just type them in and we can save them for the end. So there's plenty of definitions for the word resilience. The quick definition would be the ability to bounce back from adversity. I like this one a little bit better. Resilience is the ability to overcome challenges of all kinds and to bounce back stronger, wiser, and more personally powerful. And a pro tip, it's contagious. So when others are experiencing resilience and it is sort of showcased in their behaviors and the way that they're walking through life, we also become more resilient. And that's an important thing to remember, that it is something that people can see and it has a ripple effect. So as I said when I first started this presentation, I'm going to give you some tips of things you can do and integrate into your own life that don't take a lot of time, don't take a lot of energy, but will help to sort of build this idea of resilience and kind of help to center you, especially if you're experiencing extra stress. And if I can make a guess, I think all of us are probably experiencing extra stress right now due to all of what's going on. So these ideas come from a book called The Happiness Advantage. It's a book by an author named Sean Aker. It's an interesting book. It kind of gets into positive psychology. I always say to people, the ideas in it are fantastic. The author, he's a little pompous, but I still really like the ideas in it, so I've pulled them out and made them into my own presentation. So he talks about ways to capitalize on our happiness daily, and this is for ourselves and for people we care for. So here are 7 different tactics that can be taken to sort of build some of that positivity or to recenter us when we're feeling stressed. First one is meditation. Research shows that regular meditation can permanently rewire the brain to raise levels of happiness, lower stress, and even improve immune function. And I will say that the research supports 2 minutes a day. That is a very short amount of time. And if you're able to do it for 2 minutes a day and it works for you, I would definitely recommend it. And there's probably an infinite amount of apps for meditation, and because it's not one size fits all, you can likely find something that would be matching to what your interest is. And I should say too that as I list through these, this is not something, not everyone will benefit from each of these. It's sort of what feels best for you. And likely you'll find something in this list that's like, I could try that, and it's totally up to you. But again, don't feel like, oh, I don't like meditating, so I can't do any of this. It's okay. There's plenty of different ways to sort of center ourselves and to get back to that place of more positivity. So finding something to look forward to, anticipating future rewards can actually light up the pleasure centers in your brain, much like the actual reward will. And so you could see here, this is a picture of a sunset that I took in Madison. I have an unbelievable excitement, passion, whatever you might want to call it, for sunrises and sunsets, and know all of the places that I need to be and when I need to be there if it's looking like the sky's going to light up. And I say this because I take pictures of all the sunsets I see and I put them places, which I'm going to talk about in a little while. But I do that because when I see the pictures, it actually reminds me of that sunset, and it does actually light up the pleasure center in my brain. And it also reminds me that there's going to be more of those sunsets and there's going to be more of those sunrises, and it's something I can look forward to. So if you need one to borrow, feel free to borrow my sunset sunrise idea, but you also might have things that you very much love and look forward to. And so I recommend thinking about what that might be and how you could integrate it more into your life. Create conscious acts of kindness. So the key word here is conscious, and that means that we know we're doing it. The greatest thing about this is that it impacts us positively and it impacts other people positively. So there's a ripple effect here. And I like this example of, I'm guessing many of you have rode on a bus before. And when you're on a bus and it's got a bunch of people in it and people are getting off the bus, what typically happens is either people walk off the bus silently, or one person says thank you to the bus driver. And what happens after that? Every person to follow says thank you to the bus driver. Again, it's a conscious act of kindness, just thanking the bus driver. And that does something nice for that bus driver who just provided a service, but also it has this ripple effect to the people to follow who also then say thank you. And I'm telling you, it might seem small, but it actually impacts people in a more positive way. Infuse positivity into your surroundings. So I work, when I'm at work, in a cubicle, and it's a very small cubicle, and sometimes at work things can get stressful, and it's tough, to walk back to your cubicle, which is out in the open and small, if you're feeling stressed out. So for this particular example, what I have done in my cubicle is put up pictures of surprise, surprise sunrises and sunsets but also family and friends and things that I care about, things that make me feel good and happy, quotes that I like, so that if I am having a stressful day and go back to my cubicle, I am at least able to see things that bring me joy and a smile to my face. And it's amazing how much that can shift a mood when you're surrounded by things that remind you of all the happiness. So again, something, and maybe for you it's your car, maybe you're stressed when you drive a lot, you could put a picture on the dashboard or in your visor. I think that there's all of these different ways to do this. And if there are particular places where you find that you experience more stress, infusing that positivity into where those surroundings could be really helpful. Exercise. So we all know that exercise has a ton of benefits. Raising the endorphins helps to center us and just generally make us healthier. Research, though, shows, too, that 10 minutes a day of exercise is a good way to start. And so that's not 10 minutes a day of doing the fastest sprint you can around the block. It's 10 minutes a day of raising the heart rate and elevating it and just being more active. So it could be a brisk walk. It could be walking up and down stairs. Things that just get the heart rate going have an incredible benefit on our health and well-being. Spending money, but not on stuff. So this can mean a couple of things. First, spending money on things like, I'll use myself as an example. I have a shoe problem. I love shoes, and I buy them a lot. And I remember when I first thought more deeply about this idea of spending money but not on stuff, I thought, well, wait a minute, give up my shoe habit? I don't know about this. But there is something to this, and that is that while material items can feel good and you can really enjoy them, not doing that sometimes and putting money aside for maybe a trip or some sort of event with friends, family, partners, whomever, the memories created in that are tenfold more positive, assuming it's a good experience, which we would hope it is, than that pair of shoes. And so it doesn't mean I never buy shoes again, but it does mean that I'm more thoughtful about where and when I spend my money and how, and the importance of creating memories that I can draw back on. And the ways I spend my money has become much more of a priority to me. Also, on the other side of this is giving money to charities that you care about. So not only does that benefit you and make you feel like you've helped a cause that you care a lot about, but it also helps that charity. So that's another way that we can spend money, but not on shoes in this example. Finally, exercising a signature strength. So you can see, you might wonder why there's pool balls here. This is one of my own examples. I happen to be an amazing pool shark, which is a secret that now everyone who has seen this presentation knows. But some days when I am having a bad day and just feeling kind of down or feeling like I didn't do something well enough or could have done better, I will go shoot a couple of games of pool because, one, I'm really good at it and it reminds me that I'm good at something, and two, I enjoy it. And three, usually what ends up happening is people end up coming by and being like, oh, wow, you're really good at that, which, is a little bit, builds a little bit upon my ego needing a boost, but also feels good. And so all of those together are really, helpful to me if I'm feeling stressed. And this could be anything for anybody. Maybe you like to play the guitar. Maybe you like to cook and you're really good at those. Those things are important to practice when you are feeling an extra amount of stress, if you're able to, because that, like I said, doesn't just feel good, but it also reminds you that you're good at something. And if you're having one of those days where you're feeling like you're not good at much of anything, which I know for me happens every once in a while, this is a good opportunity to remind yourself of the things that you're good at. So in the Division of Public Health at the state, we have done things called 21-day challenges. So what that means is research says that it takes 21 days to form a habit. And so that means it's doing something in an iteration of 21 days, you're much more likely to keep doing it. And here's some suggestions that you can do that there's research support behind. The first one is meditation. We already talked about that, 2 minutes a day for 21 days. And exercise, we also talked about 10 minutes a day for 21 days. And again, it just means that you're much more likely to continue doing it if you're able to go through 21 days or iterations of it. Also a tip that if you do it, any of these after something that you do regularly, so for example, brushing your teeth, if you meditate every time you brush your teeth right afterwards, it sort of becomes a habit along with another habit. So it's just a little tip. Journaling, so writing down a few sentences about what went well in your day. And gratitude journals also, so writing down 3 things you're grateful for each day. And I remember when I first learned about 21-day challenges, it was a few years ago, and I decided, well, I'm gonna try one. And I decided to try the gratitude journal, and I was a naysayer. I was like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to do this for 21 days, and it's gonna turn terrible quickly for me. Yeah, talk about positive. But anyways, so I started writing in a gratitude journal, and it lasted a total of 2 days. And the next day I didn't do it. And the next day after that, I didn't do it either. And I was like, yep, I knew it. I'm not made for these 21-day challenges. But then I decided, no, I can do this. And I decided to try one more time. So I got a journal and I put it on my nightstand with a light and a pen. And the journal may or may not have had a sunset taped on it. I was really trying. And so each night before I went to bed, I decided I was going to write 3 things I was grateful for in my journal. And I started, and it ended up turning into something very unexpected for me. I don't know about all of you, but I'm one of those people who ruminates, and especially when I go to bed, my brain will just go in circles about the things I have to do, the things I didn't do, what went wrong today, all of those things. And what this did was it forced me to think of 3 things I was grateful for at the end of my day. And it actually shifted my brain to a more positive place. So I would say, I was grateful for pizza. It didn't have to be like, something profound, just 3 things that made me happy that day. And what ended up happening is I started to get much better night's sleep, and had, a journal that I could look back on and see the different things I was grateful for. And over the last 3 years, I've spent probably 95% of my nights doing my gratitude journal. So I kind of can't believe I'm even saying that after the naysayer in me did it for 2 days and thought that was about right. But it's been incredibly helpful in my sleep and in just sort of lifting me up at the end of a day, especially if that day was hard. So finally, one more example, I'm going to tell a story. So this is my friend Scotty, and Scotty lives in Chicago. I used to live in Chicago, and we're pals there, and he is as goofy as he looks in that picture. He's sort of always a little bit odd, but super fun to be around, and just an overall goofy guy. And also always smiling and happy. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Chicago, but in Chicago, they have a train system called the L train. And that's how a lot of people who live in Chicago commute to and from different places, including work. So Scotty commuted to work on the Red Line train. And every day he'd walk to the Red Line train and go to work. And one day, Scotty was walking to the train and he got jumped and got a lot of his stuff stolen and beaten up pretty bad. And he, this happy-go-lucky guy, kind of had a dark cloud over his head. and he had a hard time bouncing back from it. He just sort of turned into someone we didn't know. He was really down. He was not the smiley, goofy guy that we knew anymore. And I think he was really just both humiliated and scared and all of that. That being said, Scotty still went to work every day. He went on the train. And maybe a week or two later, he was walking to the train one day. And outside of the train stations, there's newspaper stands. And Scotty grabbed a newspaper out of the stand, and he got on the train, and he decided to make himself a paper hat on the train. But then he decided, I shouldn't be the only one with a paper hat. So he made another one and silently handed it to the person who was sitting next to him, who put it on their head. The next day, Scotty did the same thing, but this time he made a couple more paper hats and silently handed them to the people sitting next to him on the train, and they all put them on their heads. So this went on day after day, Scotty making more and more paper hats for everyone on the train car and handing it out to them in silence. It picked up a lot of media attention, and people started knowing about the paper hat guy on the Red Line train and wanted to be on that car so that they could be a part of the paper hat fun. And so, again, it got picked up by a lot of media. And so here was a picture that was taken by a Chicago news source, and it said, someone in it said, "I like it. It's nice to be given something, even if it is a paper hat. And it's nice to have a thought that follows you the rest of the day and simply brightens it." And it was such a good situation, and Scotty's dark cloud lifted, and he became the Scotty that we all knew again. And all of these people were talking about how wonderful it was and how it just made their day better. So again, you might be wondering, how does this have to do with a 21-day challenge? And it's random acts of kindness. So if you do a random act of kindness each day for 21 days, you're more likely to do them continually following those 21 days. But also remember that it doesn't just benefit you, it benefits other people. And as I mentioned before, it has a ripple effect. So those other people are more likely to then do another act of kindness for somebody else. So there's really, let me try and think of how I want to say this. There's plenty of ways that we can start to shift ourselves to a more positive centered place. And as this quote shows, studies have shown that our beliefs can affect our abilities. More important still than believing in your own abilities is believing that you can improve these abilities. So just believing that we can do better and shift things will actually help to improve those things. And it's not easy to do. So I'm not saying just shift your mindset and everything will be fine, but it's something you can practice. So there's something called the Pygmalion effect. And some of you may have heard of it, but the idea is when our belief in another person's potential brings that potential to life. So there was a researcher who went to a 4th grade classroom and gave an aptitude test to all of the 4th graders in the class. They all took the test, and the researcher told the teacher that 4 of the 4th graders scored off the charts in the test. In reality, those 4 4th graders scored average on the test. The researcher left, the school year went on, and at the end of the school year, the researcher came back, re-gave the aptitude test, and those 4 4th graders who had scored average actually scored high and off the charts on the test this time. So what happened there was that teacher got information about these 4 students and had different feelings about those students and believing in their potential. Now, let me be very clear, totally unethical. We should never do anything like that. But the takeaway is that when we believe in someone's potential, that potential comes forward. And that could be the same for people you work with, people in your family, colleagues, all of that. If there's someone in your life that you find to be difficult to work with, difficult to be around, if you're able to start focusing on things that you like about them, that things that make them good, you're going to see those things more. And not only are you going to see them more, they're actually going to portray them more. So it's fascinating, but there's a ton of research around it. And it's just something to think about in sort of shifting how you perceive others and how you're able to find the more positive things that will bring potential to the way that people interact with you moving forward. So one more thing I want to talk about is something called the Tetris effect. The Tetris effect is a metaphor for being stuck in a pattern of thought or behavior. When we are looking for something, we see it everywhere. So I don't know, I'm guessing many of you know the game Tetris. Excuse me. So again, some researchers had a group of people play the game Tetris day after day after day, all day long. And what they found was that when the people left the place where they were playing Tetris, all they could see was Tetris. It was like their brains had patterned so much to Tetris that when they went to the grocery store, they were thinking of ways that they could move the boxes, you know, and fit them better together. They dreamt Tetris. So things like that. And the takeaway there is that our brains are very good at patterning. The hard thing is that our brains are sponges for negativity and pattern as such. And this is something we're socialized to do. So when you think about opening the news on your phone or turning it on or reading it in the paper or whatever, typically you're like, oh my goodness, there's all this bad stuff happening. This is horrible. And yet there's also good news. And we're not as likely to find that because our brains are patterned to see negativity. Another example is I give a lot of presentations across the state. And I gave one once that had an evaluation after it. And all the evaluations came back and I was reading them and they were all really nice and good. And then one person said that I talked too fast. And I remember thinking, wait, what? I talk too fast? And I started asking my friends and family, like, do I talk too fast? Do you guys think that I'm speeding through things? And I remember the next time I gave a presentation, I started it off very, very slowly, which proved to be ineffective. But my point of this is to say, I don't remember a single thing that was good in those evaluations. What I do remember is that one evaluation that said I talked too fast. And again, that's because our brains are patterned towards negativity. The cool thing is that we can change this. We have the opportunity to purposefully seek out more positive things. And this is not me trying to be all Pollyanna about stuff. There are days that are just going to be tough. But if you start actually practicing looking for the good, looking for the positive things, you will start to see it more. So I'm going to show a video that kind of highlights this. Some of you may have seen this before. I like that it's going to be on video because when I'm in a room with people, sometimes they make noises and then it highlights different things. So this is cool. So it's real quick. Let's watch it.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events.
So I have to admit, the first time I saw that video, I did not see the gorilla. And I saw a different version of the video. And then the second time I saw this video, I did not see the curtains change colors, but I felt all proud about seeing the gorilla, so go figure. But, you know, again, the takeaway here is that we look for what we want to look for and we see what we want to see. And if our brains are already patterned in a certain way, the only way to undo that is to train them to look at other things, to develop other patterns. So finally, one more example of this. I don't know how many of you can relate to something like this, but my ex drove a white SUV, and after we broke up, I remember driving around Madison and seeing white SUVs everywhere. And I'm not talking about like, you know, because there are a lot of them, but I mean, I saw them everywhere. Every single white SUV, I was looking around like, oh gosh, oh gosh, oh gosh. And it was unbelievable. And it wasn't like suddenly there were more white SUVs out there, but my brain had patterned to looking for them. So I didn't notice any other cars except for white SUVs. And it's just really, really fascinating and interesting how our brains can so quickly produce different things that are at the forefront of our minds. And so I still to this day see more white SUVs than I'd like, but slowly but surely it's calming down, thankfully. But again, my brain patterned that way. So before we end and I take questions, something I'm going to ask you to do, if you have a pen and paper near you, I ask that you write down, based on what you saw in this presentation, what can you do today? What can you do next week, next month, next year? Write a few of those down. And the reason I ask you to write them down is because when we write things down, we're much more likely to actually feel accountable to them. And it could be something small, and you could say, today I'm going to do this. You know, and that could be it. That could be all you write down. If you don't have a pen and paper near you, I encourage you to write down something, either for all of these, for one of these, but just something that maybe you can hold yourself accountable to. So I'll take like 30 seconds for people who are going to write it down to write it down. And then if after that, I'm going to move to questions. So if you're done writing it down and you have questions, feel free to type them in. And otherwise, I'm going to count to 30, and then I'm going to move to questions. I totally forgot I was counting to 30 after like 6, but I think that was about 30 seconds. So this is the time to ask questions. I'm going to put this slide up that has my information on it. If you want to get in contact that way or don't feel comfortable asking your question in front of a group, that's totally fine too. I'll leave that up for a moment, and then I will escape out of this and go to the video so that I can see faces if people put their videos on, and otherwise you can see my face and see if I smile or frown. You have no idea if I've been doing that through this, I don't think.